The rain hammered against the small-town funeral home windows as I watched my two older brothers, Marcus and Derek, whispering in the corner. Their expensive suits looked out of place in our farming community, where most folks wore their Sunday best from the local department store. Dad's casket sat surrounded by flowers from neighbors whose cattle he'd helped birth, whose fences he'd mended during hard times. I adjusted my only tie, the same one I'd worn to high school graduation 20 years ago. The divide between us had grown wider each year since I'd chosen to stay on the family ranch while they'd moved to the city, chasing bigger opportunities and leaving the land behind. Marcus caught my eye and smirked, that same condescending look he'd perfected when we were kids, back when he'd remind me that being the youngest meant being last in line for everything. Derek just turned away, checking his gold watch, probably calculating how much time this small-town nonsense was costing him. "Tommy," Marcus called out, using the childhood nickname that made me feel like I was still the scrawny kid following them around the barn. "We need to talk after the service." My stomach dropped like a stone into a deep well. Something in his tone felt wrong, predatory even. The way they'd been avoiding me all week, handling funeral arrangements without asking my opinion, treating me like hired help instead of family, it all suddenly made terrible sense. As Reverend Hayes began speaking about Dad's 68 years of honest living, I found myself studying the weathered faces of our neighbors. These people knew the real Robert Mitchell, the man who'd never turned away a struggling farmer, who'd worked his land with his own hands until the day he died. Have you ever felt like an outsider in your own family? That suffocating feeling was crushing my chest as we prepared to bury the man who'd taught me everything about working the land. 3 days later, I sat in the cramped office of Henderson and Associates, the only law firm in our county seat. Mr. Henderson, a thin man in his 70s who'd handled legal matters for farming families for decades, shuffled through papers with practiced efficiency. Marcus and Derek flanked me, their city confidence radiating like heat from expensive cologne. "Gentlemen," Mr. Henderson began, his voice carrying the weight of 40 years practicing rural law, "your father was very specific about his wishes regarding the Mitchell Ranch." My hands trembled slightly as he opened the weathered folder. Dad had built our cattle operation from a 100-acre homestead into a 3,000-acre ranch running 500 head of prime Angus. The main house, the equipment, the grazing rights, everything 3 generations of Mitchells had worked to build. "To my sons, Marcus and Derek," Mr. Henderson read, his voice steady despite the gravity, "who have pursued successful careers in the city, I leave my financial investments and savings accounts, totaling approximately $400,000. My heart sank, but I tried to stay composed. That was fair. They'd earned college degrees, built careers in finance and real estate. They deserved something substantial. The Mitchell Ranch, including all 3,000 acres, livestock, equipment, and the family homestead, I leave to my sons Marcus and Derek to manage as they see fit. The words hit like a physical blow. Marcus leaned back in his chair, satisfaction written across his face like he'd just closed a profitable business deal. Derek nodded approvingly, already calculating the ranch's market value. And to my youngest son Thomas, Mr. Henderson continued, looking directly at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I leave my personal effects and the contents of the old barn office." Personal effects. After 35 years of working this land beside him, I'd inherited his old tools and dusty paperwork. The silence in the lawyer's office felt heavier than a hay bale in August heat. My brothers barely contained satisfaction, told me everything I needed to know. They'd been planning this moment for years. The successful sons got the empire, while the one who'd never left home got the scraps. "Is that everything?" I managed to ask, my voice cracking like a teenager's. Mr. Henderson glanced at the document again, his weathered fingers tracing the legal text. "There are details about livestock management and property transfers, but yes, those are the primary bequests." Marcus stood up, straightening his designer tie with theatrical satisfaction. "Well, that settles things nicely. Tommy, you can stay in the foreman's cabin while we figure out what to do with the property." The condescension in his voice made my jaw clench. The foreman's cabin, a 2-room shack where we'd housed seasonal workers. Derek chimed in, his tone mockingly sympathetic. "Look, we know this might seem unfair, but Dad was practical. You've got no business sense, no education. The ranch needs professional management now." I wanted to scream that I'd been managing this ranch for 15 years, while they'd been playing with spreadsheets in air-conditioned offices. I knew every acre, every water source, every animal by name. But sitting in that office, surrounded by the smell of old law books and broken dreams, I felt like the uneducated fool they'd always painted me as. "We'll probably sell to AgriCorp," Marcus continued, already discussing my life's work like a commodity. "They've been wanting to expand into this county. Should get top dollar for development rights." As they talked over me, planning the destruction of everything Dad and I had built together, I stared at my calloused hands. 35 years of sunrise chores and midnight calvings had led to this moment, officially written out of the only life I'd ever known. Saturday morning arrived gray and cold, with frost covering the pastures like a burial shroud. I stood outside the old barn office where Dad had kept his records for 40 years, holding an empty feed sack and fighting the urge to saddle up my horse and ride away forever. The red barn looked different somehow, as if it already knew I no longer belonged here. Marcus emerged from the main house, coffee mug in hand, looking like he'd been up all night calculating profit margins. "Tommy, right on time. Derek's meeting with AgriCorp representatives this afternoon, but help yourself to whatever junk Dad kept in that office." The casual dismissal stung worse than a hornet. This barn held 40 years of ranch records, breeding charts, weather logs, the entire history of our family's life on this land. Dad's office felt sacred as I pushed open the creaky door. The smell hit me immediately. Leather, hay dust, and the faint scent of the pipe tobacco he'd quit smoking after Mom's death. His desk chair sat empty by the window overlooking the main pasture, where our prize bull, Thunder, grazed peacefully among the herd. I moved slowly through the cramped space, touching familiar objects. His collection of livestock journals, the framed photo of Mom on her favorite mare, the coffee can where he kept fence staples and spare change. Each item felt like a goodbye I wasn't ready for. The desk drawers yielded expected treasures, vaccination records, old receipts, a few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to my grandmother. I was placing items carefully in my sack when my fingers brushed against something unexpected. A manila envelope taped to the bottom of the largest drawer. My heart raced as I worked it free. The envelope was thick, sealed, and marked in Dad's distinctive handwriting. For Thomas, open only when alone. My hands shook as I stared at the envelope bearing my name. The tape was old but secure, and Dad's handwriting looked deliberate, urgent even. I glanced toward the office door, hearing Marcus talking on his phone about property values, then carefully broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter on Dad's personal stationery, along with what appeared to be legal documents. My eyes immediately went to the familiar scrawl of his handwriting. My dear Thomas, if you're reading this, then the will has been read, and you're feeling like I betrayed everything we built together. I need you to know that what you just experienced was theater, not truth. My breath caught in my throat. Theater? I read the line 3 times before continuing. Your brothers have spent the last 5 years pressuring me to sell the ranch and split the money. They see our land as nothing but dollar signs and think your attachment to it is foolish sentiment. They've made it clear that if you inherited the ranch, they would contest the will and force a sale to pay legal fees. The words hit like a kick from an angry bull. 5 years. They'd been working against everything we'd built while I'd been fixing their childhood bedrooms every time they visited, cooking their favorite meals, trying to show them the beauty of the life they'd abandoned. So I gave them exactly what they expected to hear, publicly. But Thomas, you need to look at the document beneath this letter. It's dated 1 week after the will they just heard. In Texas, the most recent will supersedes all previous versions. My hands trembling like autumn leaves, I lifted the letter to reveal a legal document with an official seal. The header read, Last Will and Testament of Robert James Mitchell. Final revision. But before I could read further, I heard boots approaching the barn. Marcus was coming to check on me. I quickly shoved the documents back into the envelope and slipped it under some old breeding records just as Marcus appeared in the doorway. My heart pounded like hoofbeats during a cattle stampede. "Finding anything useful in this mess?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe with casual authority. "Don't spend all day in here. The AgriCorp people want to walk the property this afternoon." "Just gathering some photos and Dad's old journals," I managed, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Won't be much longer." After his boots faded toward the house, I waited a full 10 minutes before retrieving the envelope. My hands were steadier now, fueled by a mixture of hope and disbelief. I spread the documents across Dad's old desk and began reading the real will. I, Robert James Mitchell, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all previous wills and testaments. The legal language was formal, but as I read further, my eyes widened like a sunrise over the eastern pasture. To my son Thomas, who has dedicated his life to preserving our family legacy and understanding the true value of this land, I leave the entirety of the Mitchell Ranch, including all 3,000 acres, livestock, equipment, and mineral rights. I had to read it twice, then 3 times. The will was dated just 4 months ago and bore Dad's signature along with 2 witnesses from town I recognized, the bank president and Doc Williams. But there was more. A separate document detailed a trust fund that had been secretly established in my name over the past 5 years. Funded by selling off small parcels of less productive land my brothers didn't even know we owned. The amount made my head spin. Over $1 million. The final page contained a personal note. "Thomas, your brothers will fight this, but I've made it ironclad. You are the son who truly understands what this land means to our family." I sat in Dad's old chair, the real will spread before me like a map to buried treasure, trying to process the magnitude of what I'd discovered. Everything I'd believed about my place in the family had been turned upside down in the span of 20 minutes. Dad hadn't just loved the ranch, he'd chosen me as its guardian. But I also understood the impossible position he'd been in. Marcus and Derek had forced his hand, threatening legal battles that would have destroyed everything 3 generations had built. So he'd played the long game. giving them exactly what they expected while secretly ensuring our legacy would survive. The sound of truck doors slamming jolted me back to reality. Derek's voice echoed across the yard, loud and celebratory. "Marcus, the AgriCorp deal is even better than we thought. They want the whole spread, $3 million for the land plus development rights." I could hear them on the porch, already counting money that wasn't theirs, making plans to destroy everything Dad and I had spent our lives building. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. They were celebrating the sale of land that now legally belonged to me. Taking a deep breath that tasted like hay and hope, I gathered the documents and walked toward the house. They looked up as I approached, Derek still grinning like he'd just won the lottery. "All done with the sentimental stuff?" Marcus asked, glancing at my feed sack of personal items. "Good. We need to finalize the AgriCorp contract before they change their minds." "Actually," I said, setting the envelope on the porch table between us, "we need to talk. There's something you both need to see." The change in their expressions was immediate. Marcus's confident smile faltered like a horse with a stone in its hoof, while Derek's celebration died faster than grass in a drought. They had recognized something in my tone, some shift in the dynamic they'd controlled for so long. "What's that?" Marcus demanded, his voice sharp as barbed wire as he stared at the envelope. I pulled out the real will and placed it on the weathered porch table between us. It's Dad's actual final will, dated 4 months after the one we heard in Henderson's office. Derek moved closer, his face pale as winter sky. "That's impossible. We were there when Dad signed his will last year." "You were there when he signed a will," I corrected, my voice steady as a well-trained cutting horse. "But apparently, he had second thoughts about rewarding sons who spent 5 years trying to convince him to sell our family's heritage." The silence that followed was deeper than a stock bond in August. I watched as they read the document, their faces cycling through disbelief, anger, and, finally, a cold fury I'd never seen before, like wolves cornered in a canyon. "This is fake," Marcus snarled, crumpling the pages like waste paper. "You forged this somehow. Dad would never." "Call Henderson," I interrupted calmly. "The original is filed with his office. Dad made sure everything was legal and tighter than a new saddle." Derek's hands were shaking like cottonwood leaves as he pulled out his phone. I could hear the ringing, then Mr. Henderson's familiar voice answering. "Mr. Henderson, this is Derek Mitchell. We need to know if there's another will. What? When? Are you certain?" The conversation lasted 5 minutes, but I could see the truth dawning on their faces with each passing second, like watching storm clouds gather over the prairie. When Derek hung up, his face was ashen as old barnwood. "He filed it 2 days before he died," Derek whispered. "It's real. It's all real." Marcus slammed his fist on the table, making the coffee cups jump. "This is insane. We had plans. AgriCorp is expecting—" "AgriCorp can expect disappointment," I replied quietly. "This ranch isn't for sale." "Now I have a question for you. Have you ever seen karma work this perfectly in real life?" As my brothers stood there processing their new reality like cattle in a thunderstorm, I pulled out the additional documents Dad had left. Bank statements showing the secret trust fund, records of their phone calls pressuring him to sell, even copies of emails they'd sent discussing how to handle the Tommy problem. "He knew," I said, spreading the papers across the table like cards in a winning hand. "He knew about every conversation, every scheme, every time you tried to convince him that preserving this ranch was a waste of money." Marcus grabbed one of the emails, his face flushing red as fresh blood as he read his own words back. We were protecting the family's financial future. You don't understand what it takes to manage real wealth. I understand what it takes to manage real land, I replied. Something you both forgot while you were busy calculating its destruction. Derek slumped into a porch chair, the fight draining out of him like water from a broken trough. 5 years, he muttered. 5 years of planning, and he was documenting everything. The irony was perfect as a spring morning. While they'd been plotting to sell our heritage, Dad had been building a case for why I deserved to protect it. Every dismissive comment about playing cowboy, every suggestion that the ranch was just dirt and cows, every attempt to convince him that progress meant pavement, it had all been carefully noted and filed away. There's more, I continued, pulling out the final document. Dad established a scholarship fund for local farm kids to be administered through ranch profits. It's designed to help children from farming families attend agricultural college, kids who want to learn modern techniques while respecting the land. Marcus looked up sharply. Using ranch money? Using my money, I corrected. Since I now own the ranch, Dad believed our legacy should be about nurturing the next generation of stewards, not just accumulating wealth. The next hour was a blur of phone calls, legal consultations, and heated arguments that echoed across the pastures like thunder. My brothers tried every angle they could think of, questioning Dad's mental state, threatening to contest the will, even suggesting I'd somehow coerced a man who could outwork men half his age until the day he died. But Mr. Henderson had been thorough as a good ranch dog. Dad's medical records showed perfect health, the witnesses were beyond reproach, and the timeline made their accusations impossible. Dr. Williams confirmed Dad's sharp mind during his final checkup, and the bank president testified to his clear thinking during their last meeting about ranch finances. As the reality sank in like rain into thirsty soil, I watched my brother's true natures emerge completely. Marcus paced the porch like a caged cougar, muttering about lawsuits and injustice. Derek sat in stunned silence, occasionally shaking his head as if he could wake up from this nightmare. "This isn't over," Marcus finally declared, pointing an accusatory finger at me like a gun. "We'll fight this. We'll prove Dad wasn't thinking clearly." "With what evidence?" I asked calmly. "The medical records showing his perfect health? The detailed notes he kept about your phone calls? The fact that he consulted 2 different lawyers to make sure this was bulletproof?" Derek looked up with hollow eyes. Why didn't he just talk to us? Why didn't he give us a chance to change? For the first time since this began, I felt a pang of sadness for them, like watching a lame horse that couldn't be saved. He tried, Derek. For years he tried. Every time he talked about the beauty of this land, you mentioned its market value. Every time he shared stories about our grandfather homesteading here, you checked your phones. You made your choice long before he made his. The truth was settling over the porch like dust after a cattle drive. Dad hadn't just been protecting the ranch. He'd been trying to save them from themselves. "So, what happens now?" Marcus asked, his voice defeated as a broken-down truck. I looked out over the pastures where our cattle grazed peacefully, where Dad had taught me to read weather signs and understand the rhythm of the seasons. The late afternoon sun painted everything golden, the way it had for 3 generations of Mitchells. "Now, we figure out how to move forward," I said, surprising myself with the gentleness in my voice. Despite everything they'd done, these were still my brothers. The ranch will continue operating, but with Dad's vision intact. We'll modernize where it makes sense, but we'll never forget that this land is more than just an investment." Marcus scoffed. "You'll run it into the ground within 5 years. You don't have the business sense to manage something this size." "You're right about one thing," I admitted. "I'll need help with the business side, but I know this land. I know these cattle, and I know what Dad really wanted. I'll hire good accountants, keep the experienced hands, and yes, I'll probably make mistakes, but I'll make them while trying to honor what 3 generations built." Derek looked up hopefully. "Does this mean, could we still be part of this somehow?" The question hung in the air like morning mist. Part of me wanted to say no, to let them experience the same rejection they'd planned for me. But that wasn't who Dad had raised me to be. "That depends," I said carefully. "This can't be about what you think you deserve anymore. If you want to be part of this, it has to be about what you can contribute to something bigger than yourselves." Over the following months, we began the difficult process of rebuilding not just business relationships, but family ones. Marcus eventually took a consulting role, helping modernize our record-keeping while learning to appreciate the land he'd once dismissed. Derek chose to start his own agricultural investment firm, using his share of Dad's savings to help other family farms modernize without selling out. The scholarship program launched that fall, helping 8 local kids attend agricultural college. Every time I sign a check or attend a graduation ceremony, I think about Dad's real legacy. Not just the land we preserve, but the knowledge we pass on. Standing in the barn office one evening, now truly my office, I whispered to the sunset, "Thank you for trusting me with our home, Dad." Sometimes the last page really does change everything. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to know, where are you hearing this from? Drop a comment below telling me your location, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true stories from ranch life. Your support means everything to this old cowboy.